But our top story and our focus this evening, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the US President Joe Biden will hold direct talks in a short while from now. Their first direct meeting of this kind since the start of the Ukraine war. They've spoken on the phone in the past. It's aimed to bridge the growing differences between the two countries over New Delhi's stand on the Ukraine war, its ties with Moscow. Before we come to our guest to get a sense of the build-up to that 8:30 p.m. meeting, take a look at just why this meeting is significant. It's our top story.
As the Ukraine war rumbles destructively into its second month, one of Russia's oldest allies, India, has been in constant geopolitical spotlight. What role will India play? Can't India leverage its friendship with Russia to stop the war? Why is India going soft on Putin's invasion? Is India reducing the impact of Western sanctions on Moscow? Has India aligned itself in a deeply polarized world since Putin's tanks rolled into Ukraine? The answers to all these queries came when Prime Minister Narendra Modi made this mega assertion, stating that a fearless India is charting its own course in global diplomacy.
आज दुनिया के सामने एक ऐसा भारत है जो बिना किसी डर या दबाव के अपने हितों के लिए अड़िग रहता है.
External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar also put the record straight in Parliament.
In a complex and globalized world, every nation takes into account the reality of interdependence. Therefore, even as they express their position in words and deeds, they also adopt policies that safeguard the well-being of their population.
As India has carved its own diplomatic path amid the conflict, the United States is trying hard to get India on board with its Sanction Russia plan. And that's exactly what POTUS Joe Biden will focus on when he meets Prime Minister Modi tonight. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and US President Joe Biden will meet today virtually, and the White House has already confirmed that President Biden also will urge Prime Minister Modi to take a hard line against Russia's Ukraine invasion. This meeting is, however, unlikely to change India's stand on the Ukraine war. The government has reiterated that we stand for peace and our national interest is our priority. America has been trying everything it can to get India to budge under pressure, including this seemingly callous and intemperate remark by US Deputy National Security Advisor Daleep Singh. I don't think anyone would believe that if China once again breached the line of actual control, Russia would come running in India's defense. The abrasive and much derided quip from Biden's man was clearly to try and attack India's relationship with Russia. And that was underscored last week by Sergei Lavrov, Putin's very vocal foreign minister's visit to India.
We have been developing especially privileged strategic partnership with New Delhi, and this is one of the key priorities of the Russian foreign policy. It's equality and mutual trust, which underlies our acts on the international arena, and in the context of multipolar world, which is being objectively shaped, as you alluded to yesterday, addressing a conference in New Delhi. We certainly are interested in having the world order balanced.
Historically, India has had very close strategic ties with Russia. Over the past decades, India's relationship with the United States of America has also been improving and across multiple fronts. But superseding all these relationships is the Narendra Modi government's India First policy. And that's the point India is making both to Russia and to the United States of America, that India will protect India's national interest first. With cameraman Lalit Mohan Joshi in Kyiv, Ukraine, Gaurav Sawant for India Today.
Joining me now, Raj Chengappa, Editorial Director, Publishing at India Today Group, joins me here in the studio. KC Singh, former Secretary at the Ministry of External Affairs. Manoj Joshi, Distinguished Fellow, ORF, who was also in Washington as a correspondent in the past. We also hope to be joined by voices from the United States. But to you, Raj, first, as we build up to this meeting, we are expecting opening remarks by both the leaders to be live. The significance of it for you?
Well, it comes at a very critical time, particularly in the war with Ukraine. There's going to be a decisive phase now where Russia is most likely going to focus on the eastern region, the Donbas region, and the entire war is going to be there. Even while it does that, America is going to intensify its economic sanctions and see whether, apart from supporting Ukraine in the fight against Russia. So when it comes to that, there have also been a lot of statements that have been going on between America and India, a lot of unhappiness expressed by many officials from America, a lot of indirect threats of consequences, and President Biden himself talked of India's shaky stand. I think this is an opportunity for them, both India and US. We need each other strategically, but it is not at the expense of our relations with Russia. And to clarify, in some senses, the fog that has enveloped our relations on this particular matter, why has India taken this particular stand? It is not our war, actually. We didn't get into this. We have very high stakes with Russia, whether it's in defense, whether it's in fertilizers, to some extent energy. We have stakes in America for the future. We have already said that's going to be our global strategic partner. This should not come in the way of that. And our stand in the UN, particularly on various, we are members of the Security Council till December, on various issues, I think we voted 12 times, has been nuanced and has indicated that while we're unhappy with what Russia is doing on Ukraine, but at the same time we've abstained and indicated that we would continue to keep whatever our strategic interests intact without yielding to US pressure on this front.
So it's a delicate balancing act in a way that India has to do. What is India expected to tell the United States? Joining me now is Geeta Mohan. She's been in Ukraine on the battlefield in a way, on ground zero. Geeta, what's the sense that you're getting? What is the message that India has today for Washington, given the fact that it comes against the backdrop of the US Deputy National Security Advisor here a few weeks ago, sending out a strong message to India that Washington would not approve of India having a strong economic relationship with Russia at a time like this? What is the message that India has? How is this delicate balancing act actually going to be worked out?
Well, there are two things over here, Rajdeep. One is the fact the Indo-US ties and the tone and tenor for the talks is going to be set when Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Biden meet. Apart from that, there are two very important asks by Washington, D.C. One is reduction of energy imports from Russia into India, which Raj Chengappa was just talking about. And secondly, decreasing reliance and dependence on Russian defense. These are two very important aspects that are that Washington, D.C. is going to ask India to do. And India's response is going to be one where India is going to say that these are two areas where India is going to look at its own strategic interests, which is what they cannot reduce dependence immediately, and they do not want to. That India does not want to reduce dependence. Russia is a strategic partner. Secondly, at a time when there is a surge in price rise, India has to look at its own interests, and it is not in India's interest to really go ahead and decrease dependence on imports of Russia. So these are the two important areas that they'll focus on, apart from the fact that the two sides are looking at engaging on the bilateral and trade front.
Right. Geeta Mohan is there in Donetsk at the moment. Let's take that forward, therefore, this balancing act that we are talking about. KC Singh, how is India going to be able to tell the Americans that, look, our national interests are our national interests. They can't be dictated to by Washington. This is not our war. And we have a strong, enduring relationship with Russia that goes back decades on defense, in other critical areas, for our energy needs. Why should we be dragged into America's desire to, in a way, encircle Russia? Can we do that? Do you believe that can we do plain speaking to the Americans at a moment like this?
Look, firstly, these are general principles. Strategic independence, not lining up with any one country, staying neutral. This is what India has done for the last 60, 70 years, including during the period of which this government is very critical. When Nehru created non-alignment, this is essentially non-alignment. But what has changed is, and I think that is what has to be understood, look at the choreography of the meetings today. It's very rare that you have a 2+2 meeting, which is foreign minister and the defense minister, ministers of the two countries meeting together, which means there's a wider range of subjects. But you have a summit preceding it, which means at the highest level, the leaders are meeting, and then the ministers go into it. Now, Americans have come to the conclusion, they've tried sending senior diplomats. They've played the good cop, the bad cop. They tried threatening, they tried cajoling. They realized that India is stuck. So Biden's been now provisioned to handle that. So he'll be dealing with the prime minister before the talks come in. As Geeta Mohan said, there are two excuses that we are giving. We are saying one is energy and the second one is defense. Now, you got defense minister meeting their defense minister this morning. They'll say, look, this is what we are putting on the table. They can only give you this. We will give you this, this, this. And the second one is energy. On energy, I'm sure Biden's going to tell him, we will fulfill your needs. We'll try getting you from other countries. Other countries are also taking a hit. We are pushing the Europeans to reduce the dependence on Russian gas. So we can't keep using it as an argument. Now, why this argument will not work beyond a point? We are thinking of the Cold War. At that point, we could stand with the Russians on Afghanistan, on Hungary, on Czechoslovakia, because we were not that close to the Americans or to the West. Now we have moved into a position where we need the Americans. We are engaged with them on a very wide front. We're looking at the next 30 years or 40 years to use America the way the Chinese use them. Because the problem today is China. At that point, we didn't have a China problem of the nature that we have today. So can you do without the Americans? Or will you keep repeating the same truths about those two things about Russia? The Americans are going to turn around and say, the Russians will move deeper and deeper into the Chinese corner. Their dependence will be much greater on them. And look at the way the Pakistanis have flipped. They've sacked a prime minister on the basis that he had drawn the Pakistan foreign policy towards the Russians. They can see the gap developing between India and US. And the Pakistan army has done a mid-air flip, and they're trying to position themselves there. That, look, you can't count on India, but we are here. We got rid of a prime minister you're not happy with. So things are not as they always have been. You can't keep repeating the same arguments. So you have to make new choices. And it's not going to be easy. And you can't just sit with your eyes blindfolded while the Russians keep killing people in Ukraine. We have to take a stronger stand on it.
You know, it is a multipolar world. We are in a post-Cold War era. There is the China factor. So clearly, foreign policy requires far more delicate negotiation than ever before. Irfan Nuruddin now joins us from Washington. Professor Nuruddin, is there a sense you get that the Americans would like India to officially, in a way, distance themselves from Russia, something which the Indians have been reluctant to do? Even in the United Nations, we've abstained from votes on, for example, removing Russia from the United Nations Human Rights Commission. The aim of India is that we want to stand neutral, and this is not our war. Can that message work with Washington, or does Washington now expect the world to be divided between allies of the United States and allies of Russia, as was the case during the Cold War era? Is Washington willing to accept India's concerns?
I think Washington has already shown that it is willing to listen to India. The truth of the matter is that it's 2 months in, and India has taken a particular position consistently at the United Nations in its dealings, and the United States has been very patient. It has forbeared on that. It has allowed India to have that autonomy. It has not forced India into a position of having to declare loyalties. But patience is wearing thin. And Ambassador Singh's comments just preceding mine are spot on. At some point, what's going to happen today is choices are going to be made clear. And the truth of the matter is that for all the talk about strategic autonomy and strategic independence, which India has every right to as a sovereign nation, India is also talking about the US as being a global strategic partner for the coming 50 years, 100 years. It has a lot invested in the relationship with the Quad alongside the United States, Australia, and Japan. So in that sense, that is not about strategic autonomy. That is about India having chosen sides and said, we see the future as being with the United States. In which case, I think it is perfectly reasonable to expect that the Americans are going to say, hey, if that's true, what about now? What can we expect from you when the chips are down? And what you're telling us.
But what does, Professor Nuruddin, in a moment, I'll play out what Foreign Minister Jaishankar said on maintaining a neutral, independent stand. He spoke in Parliament and outside. But what does the United States want India to do? Does it want us to vote against Russia at every international forum? Does it want us, in a way, to condemn Russian aggression as opposed to, at the moment, simply condemning the violence that's taking place in Ukraine?
I think there's a lot of confusion on Capitol Hill as to why India has chosen not to do that. I mean, the truth is that we've got two different audiences in Washington. One is at the high level of the administration, the Pentagon. Those are people with long memories who understand India's traditional historical alliance and partnership with Russia, that understand the slow movement, starting with UPA 1 and continuing through Modi 2 towards the United States. They see those as hard-fought victories. They understand all of that. You also have a lot of people in Congress whose memories are less long, for whom India is a recent good news partner, who are very, very confused as to why India hasn't taken a stronger stance. They don't understand India's ambivalence around these things. So yes, I do think the United Nations stuff, but more generally, I think it's hard for a lot of people to understand not just the lack of condemnation, but why India seems to be going through so much trouble to set up rupees for ruble denominated trading accounts, why it seems that India is doubling down on cheap oil, even while Europe and the United States are paying higher and higher gas prices at the petrol pump in spite of political backlash over there. So it does seem like it's not just about condemnation, it's actually about the actions as well. And I expect that the External Affairs Minister will explain that very plainly to his counterpart today, just as I'm sure they've been explaining to other visitors to Delhi about that. But that rationale needs to be made much clearer, I think, for it to resonate with Congress people and with the American public more generally.
Manoj Joshi, has India, in your view, been ambivalent, or simply tried to stand for what it perceives as its national interests? The fact is that if the Russians are providing us with relatively inexpensive oil, if the Russians have been long-standing partners for India over 30, 40 years, stretching back to the Indo-Russian Friendship Treaty in 1971, why should we not leverage that friendship?
Well, I think what you have to understand, Rajdeep, is that we are now in a situation where a East versus West proxy war is being fought. And when things descend to war, both sides want you to take sides. And as far as the United States is concerned, the United States is the global hegemon. And so we accept American hegemony. And what does that mean? There's a difference between hegemony and dominance. Hegemony is something which is supposed to come naturally. I mean, so we've been used to the idea that American leadership in the world. Dominance is dependent more on coercion. So the United States, so far as India is concerned, in the recent decades, has been more of a hegemon, and now the hegemon is calling in the chips. No matter what you say about national interests, etc., the point is that on paper, we're all supposed to be sovereign states and equal to each other. But the reality in international politics is somewhat different. It's a fact, and people have spoken about this. Casey said, we need the United States and the West for our technology, capital, markets in the next 30, 40 years, where we hope to achieve our principal aim, which is the economic transformation of this country. So this war has confronted us with a basic choice, basic problem. And this war is not our war, I agree. Our problem is that we depend on Russia in three key areas. One is, of course, arms. I think the extent of dependence on arms has been grossly understated. People don't realize that, you import systems. We may have been the second or third largest importer in the last 20 years. But you see, in the last 60 years, we've been a much larger importer. Those systems are still with us. MiG-21, T-72 tanks, they are upgraded, they require components, etc. From Russia. So one is arms. The second is geopolitical. The Russians have backed us on every geopolitical issue relating to South Asia, down to India's demotion of Kashmir as a state in 2019. And the third key issue is the issue of China. Meaning, if we just let things be, if we go along with the Americans, it only means that the Russian-Chinese friendship becomes deeper. And the problem there is that the Russians supply us systems which the Americans are not willing to give us. I mean, you can take the BrahMos missile, you can take the nuclear-propelled submarines. Now, I'd like to know, when the current 2+2 talks take place, are the Americans going to put down any of that on the table? Meaning, last year, the Americans signed the AUKUS agreement, where they breached one key point of their non-proliferation policy, which is to agree to make Australia a manufacturer of nuclear-propelled submarines. So they were able to do that because they had a certain sharp understanding of their own security. But we too have a sharp understanding of our security, and hence our stand.
Therefore, we expect more, can the Americans deliver something to us now, which the Russians cannot? As Manoj Joshi points out, the kind of defense equipment we want, the Russians have been over the years willing to give us that equipment. The Americans have put a number of conditionalities, have been unwilling in general to give us that equipment. But at the same time, they want us to be part of this larger strategic partnership. The Quad is something which is now seen to be a future arrangement to check the rise of China. Which way do we go? Does India have to at some stage make choices, despite what the foreign minister seemed to suggest in Parliament the other day, that we will make our choices based on our national interest? How do we actually navigate in this very, very difficult environment, or the difficult choices that we have before us? Can the Americans give us something today that would satisfy us, you think, Raj?
Unlikely.
Unlikely.
And I think that's the reason why we are saying the trajectory is moving towards the US, because China is our biggest threat, and we would require US at some point, just as US requires us. It's not like we are poor players in this. We have our hands that America would want.
What does the US want from us at the moment? I mean, what is it that the US wants from us?
They want to convert this into, say, a larger ideological war. Democracies versus authoritarian states, which you then lump Russia and China and everybody else that is doing nonsense like this. So that is one part of it. And as India stands out, they say, look, aren't you, the lone...
but would they be willing to satisfy our energy needs? There have been some reports suggesting that the US may be willing to reach out to India specifically on energy needs.
Well, look, energy is only one aspect of it, okay? And the fact is, we import just 2% from Russia of our total needs. But America and Europe is not giving up their energy needs now.
That's exactly
Why are you forcing us? Second, let's see, when you talk of energy, why is America not stopping uranium from there? They import a lot of uranium from Russia. How come that is not part of this whole deal? Why does America choose its strategic needs? It says, all right, we will not buy Russian oil, but we'll continue to buy, Russian uranium. Why aren't they putting a stop to that? Because their nuclear plants will get into trouble out there. Then take a look at defense. As Manoj Joshi says, are you willing to sell us a nuclear submarine? Are you willing to allow us with the kind of 400 Triumph missiles that Russia is selling us, cutting-edge stuff that's there? The missiles that is there. I think the point that India is making is, yes, we are willing to transit if you come up with your critical technology to us. But right now, we are dependent, some say 65% dependent on Soviet Union, and some say in the last couple of years, it's now reducing to 35%. So the key remains that I think the trajectory is towards the US, and if you'd like to call the West, because that's where the final battle is going to come, and India's moved to that direction. It's a transition. Don't expect us to keep jumping ship just because you have a need immediately.
The double standards that Raj Chengappa just now alluded to, Irfan Nuruddin, you expect India to give up its long-standing relationship with Russia, but the United States will use Russia for uranium, will use Russia for its needs. Why should India give up its relationship when Europe, and we know that the Austrian Prime Minister, even as we speak, is in Russia today. There are many European nations who continue to maintain their relationships with with Russia. Why should India be expected to take a stand? I mean, this is where the double standards of the United States or the Western world, in a way, shine out.
Well, I mean, the whole point of strategic autonomy, Rajdeep, is that we all have double standards. I mean, India is the master of this, right? I mean, and we're on here defending those double standards, to talk about democracy, to talk about sovereignty, and then not to condemn. So, but the Austrian
hold on. You know, the United States in the past has bombed Syria. The United States has had a war in Afghanistan where we can have, you know, there's a huge question mark about invading Afghan sovereignty. The United States in Iraq. The United States history over the last 30 years or 50 years as a global supercom has involved walking into Latin America, South America when it suited it. Why should India be expected to be the world's moral guardian when the United States is not going to play that role at all?
India is a lot of things. It is definitely not the world's moral guardian.
No, but the United States wants us to join us in what they're calling some kind of a moral war between democracies and dictatorships.
They're not calling it a moral war, Rajdeep. That is ridiculous. I mean, it is an act of naked aggression against a sovereign country. The notion that unless India wants to take the stance that countries are allowed to invade others, I don't see what the United States did in the past, or any country did in the past. At some point, the whole point of this Quad relationship, and the reason India has invested all of their time and energy, the reason that the 2+2 is such an achievement of Indian diplomacy, is because of the move towards a stronger relationship with the United States in order to defend against Chinese aggression. And so the question over here is not some who said, she said. This is not some parlor game debate. If India does not see value in the relationship with the United States, that's fine. If it does see value in the relationship with the United States, then it has to be a grown-up and say, what are the potential consequences of the actions that we're taking right now?
Okay.
So if in years, China was to invade aggressively in the Northeast, what would India want the United States to do? And would it be very helpful to India's cause if at that point the United States says, you know what, when we needed you, this is not our war. When we needed you, you guys were nowhere to be seen. You wanted to keep your options open. Fine. Is that very helpful to India's interest?
KC Singh, you want to respond to that question that Professor Nuruddin has raised? God forbid tomorrow, Chinese adventurism in Arunachal, or already as seen in Ladakh a couple of years ago, the Americans could well turn around and say, look, you didn't back us when we wanted you to. Why should we back you today? And the Chinese could turn to the Russians and say, look, you're with us. We are within your sphere of influence. Is there that realpolitik that needs to be looked at?
No, Rajdeep, I don't think the Americans are expecting us to completely abandon the Russians. I don't think that's their argument. At the moment, they are saying we are trying to bring economic pressure on Putin, not on Russia, on Putin, so that he backs off from attacking Ukraine. And so the sanctions regime is where they don't want them to be applying the sanctions and you going and providing relief to the Russians when those sanctions are biting. It's essentially about that. And that's where the oil comes in. Weapons not an immediate issue because your S-400 is not coming tomorrow. What is coming is the element of discounted. It's just the optics of it, that India is willing to buy discounted oil when the developed world is imposing sanctions. The optics is very bad of that you are trying to benefit when the other countries are willing to take a hit, which are trying to apply pressure on Putin. Now, second thing is, of course, this argument is important of democracies versus autocracies. Not for Russia. It's important how you're going to balance China. That is the way you balance China. And that was the whole rationale behind your Quad. It was a combination of the four democracies, Japan, Australia, India, and the US in the Indo-Pacific. Now, you can't say in the Indo-Pacific, we want to work with the Americans. In the rest of the world, we want. Now, this kind of hair splitting is what is not finding acceptance in Washington. They said, either you with us, the whole hog, where we can explain that certain things we'll do, certain things we can't do. You take 62. Who came to India's rescue? The Soviets never came rushing in. It was President Kennedy who stepped in behind us. President Radhakrishnan went to Washington. He was hosted there. And the Americans and President Kennedy was willing to throw his entire weight behind us, to the extent that Prime Minister Nehru even panicked and wrote a letter saying, can you give us the planes with the pilots? So Americans were the ones who came to your help at that stage. Of course, when they realized that beyond a stage, we were not willing to go into the camp. That is the time of camps and alliances. They realized India is not going to be an ally. but they are trying to figure out.
But that's what they seem to want at the moment. They seem to want us to return into the world of camps. Ukraine, in a way, has got the world divided once again into camps. We thought that we had moved beyond that world, that we could genuinely be non-aligned. Now Ukraine has put the world, in a sense, on the horns of a dilemma. Countries are being asked to make those choices, KC Singh.
No, this is not. Even when we were non-aligned, didn't we sign the Indo-Soviet Friendship Treaty? We were always tilting towards the Soviets. We had a tilt there, even in that Cold War. In this Cold War, change it. We have a tilt towards the Americans. But then when you're tilting that way, you may be sitting on the fence, but there's a tilt in it. And if you want to develop a certain way over the next 30 years and your primary threat is China, then today you have to make a choice. Do you keep sitting on a fence saying, no, I shall be on the fence? Or do you change the language you're using with the Russians? Do you read the riot act to them privately? Do you tell them, guys, this can't go on the way it is? It is not a Hungary or it's not a Czechoslovakia. This is a bloody battle. And in today's battle, people dying, people dead. This is just playing badly. I don't know if you saw the latest Economist has a devastating cartoon. You got Putin standing there with blood on his hands, trying to shake hands with Xi and Prime Minister Modi. And Xi is ready to shake hands, and he tells Prime Minister Modi, go ahead and shake hands. We'll cover it with oil later. Now, you know, these kinds of cartoons, the damage they do to your image, you're on the same level as the Chinese. Now, you know, we have to take a call. Are we the largest democracy of the world? Are we going to establish an Indian way of handling foreign policy? Or you regress now to the Nehruvian non-alignment, Nehru that you despise, and you go back to now hiding behind that non-aligned, the kind of language one heard 30 years ago or 40 years ago when one joined the service. We have to evolve. We can't just keep sticking. And it doesn't mean we have to give up our independence.
You know, it's interesting, and, you know, it requires, of course, nuanced positioning. It requires a delicate balancing act, not easy. But Manoj Joshi, I just want to also, for a moment, focus on that personal chemistry, if I may, between Joe Biden and Prime Minister Modi. Remember, this is a Prime Minister who went to the United States and echoed Ab ki baar Trump Sarkar. And there are elements within the democratic establishment who have been critical of Prime Minister Modi. A quick word of that before we go off to Washington.
Well, I think that's very important. The thing is that there is no chemistry between Joe Biden and Prime Minister Modi, and that whole concept of chemistry, etc., has gone with Trump. But one point I do need to make, that the US administration actually has been very understanding of the situation. Mm-hmm. They have taken, meaning whatever people like Dalip Singh may have said, and just may I remind you that when the Ladakh crisis took place in 2020, according to Ambassador Juster, it is the Indians who requested the Americans not to make an issue of it. Meaning it's the Indians who said, please play down your support, because after all, our own government has not told us the extent of Chinese ingress into across the LAC so far. So the thing is that we cannot just blame the US. So now the point I'm making is that the administration has been understanding. The danger is, however, that as the situation in Ukraine deteriorates further, as we see more death, we see more destruction, we see, you know, what Casey Singh pointed out about cartoons and references, etc. You have an emotional reaction building up. And this emotional reaction in the public, in the media, and more important, in the US Congress. Mm-hmm. And from the US Congress, this will inevitably affect the administration. I think from the administration's point of view, they are seeking it, looking at it in very practical terms. You know, we need India, Indo-Pacific, etc., etc. But, you know, as far as the American public is concerned, they don't, there's not much news on Indo-Pacific in the American channels or American, they are completely focused right now on Ukraine and the developments there. And the developments there show no signs of coming under control. In fact, they show every sign of becoming worse.
But
so I think our predicament...
you know, we could turn around and say we did abstain when it came to removing Russia from the United Nations Human Rights Commission. That was, you know, the Russians wanted us to take a stronger stand. The Chinese did. the Chinese voted against the motions. We abstained. So we could turn around and say we are actually trying to carve out a neutral, independent position.
I think, Rajdeep, those are technicalities. What I'm trying to point out is that there is an emotional reaction that is there. They don't look at UN votes and things like that. That's what the administration does. But when the Congress looks at it, when the public looks at it, when the media looks at it, they look at the situation on the ground, the reports coming out of Ukraine. So no one's going to bother about those technicalities or explanation of vote or whatever it is that is issued by the diplomats after the voting. So your point is, how do you deal with that emotional upsurge?
In a way, and let's just listen into what Dr. Jaishankar said when he was asked this question in Parliament during the debate about India's position on Ukraine and how India intended to maintain what is being described as an independent stand. Listen in to Dr. Jaishankar.
In a complex and globalized world, every nation takes into account the reality of interdependence. Therefore, even as they express their position in words and deeds, they also adopt policies that safeguard the well-being of their population.
Even as we are discussing, a senior corporate has sent me a message on WhatsApp, listening to our conversation, Raj, saying this is different. The Western world is horrified and disgusted by the brutality of the Russian aggression in Ukraine. Today, hundreds of Western companies are giving up on tens of billions of dollars of profits, and they watch India kind of gorging on their misfortunes. These companies, with which we very much want to deal with in the future, are not going to forget. India must therefore be seen to be squarely against the aggression and mass killing of civilians. So you've got those who are saying India must take, in a sense, a stronger moral stand against what is happening in Ukraine. Can you take that stand without angering the Russians?
No, Rajdeep, I think Manoj Joshi, when he spoke about India's stand, these are just words. The fact is, in diplomatic circles, when we voted, when we abstained on the UN Human Rights Commission, Russia being suspended from it, we had taken quite an extreme step, because tomorrow we are also open to such criticism. If something happens in Kashmir and 30 or 40 people are killed, we can be also hauled up, and we allowed ourselves to reach that point in this sense. So we have told the Americans that if you see the 12 statements that we've made, increasingly we have really gone further and further away from support to Russia, expressing our deep concerns on each of these matters from the initial wording. So that's one part. The second part is the consequences of that war. USA never consulted us. We are not a NATO country. They didn't talk about what they were doing in Europe and arming Ukraine and everything else, and took us into conferences or any of those things. You take a look at Afghanistan. Here we had high stakes in it. America, scooted when it suited them and left us high and dry. So it is not like, we don't have the sort of, we have deep national interests that are there. There is a nuanced position, and maybe the globe wants us to come out and say whatever it is. But the fact is, we have high inflation here. The commodities crisis coming out of this war is impacting us more than anything else. So wherever we can bring down the prices, is America going to do that for us? The government is in trouble. We've seen two governments in Pakistan and in Sri Lanka go down because of inflation and the economy going into a mess. The war has pushed fuel prices up, and we can see the sort of dissent that is happening among common people. You are asking us to make sacrifices when you're not making, as I pointed out earlier, to your own energy needs. Has Europe done that for its energy needs? It continues to buy, it doesn't want the shock. What we are arguing for is, look, there is a transition period for us if we have to wean ourselves away from Russia. There is defense that we need to do it. There's fertilizers that we are dependent upon. These are things that we need assurances on. And of course, we are with you. We understand finally the battle is going to be with China. That's the new, right now there's a world disorder that is there, and we are feeling the secondary effects of that disorder by all these kind of things that's happening. But when it moves, we are going decisively forward towards with you. Mm-hmm. And therefore the Quad, you set up the AUKUS, that's fine with us, but we need to move in that direction. And strategically, I think we are seeing that happening as we engage. I think America understands that. They understand some of our concerns, and we are moving closer and closer to them like never before that we did. Look at the amount of engagements we've had with them. Look at the range of things that we are now talking to them with, which in the past would be unheard of. We have about $20 billion worth of defense equipment with them. We have $10 billion more on the pipeline. I mean, we have high stakes there as well. So they can't turn around and say, look, you're not being part of us.
Therefore, Professor Nuruddin, I come back to it. Is Washington aware? I'm sure they're aware of India's long-standing relationship and interests with Russia. But do they really want India? I come back. Do they really want India to make those choices? Is this a moment for America to try and sort of push India into a sphere of influence which we don't want to be part of? Or is the United States itself, the US limitations itself have been revealed in the last year. We've seen the US pull out from Afghanistan. So does the United States still believe that we are in the 1980s in a way?
I don't think the United States has ever thought we were in the 1980s, not since the 1980s. It understands we're in 2022. It understands that India and the United States are a lot different partners than they were a decade ago because of a lot of very hard work by multiple administrations on both sides. And the culmination of that was the Quad. I don't understand how you keep saying India wants to be independent while India wants to be part of the Quad. Those two are not reconcilable ideas. We're either part of the Quad or we're not part of the Quad. If we want to be part of the Quad, then what we're saying is that we want to be seen as a member of the most elite group of democracies that are shaping a different order in the Indo-Pacific, where we expect foreign policy and strategic policy for the 21st century to be set. That is about taking sides. When Prime Minister Modi was in America in September for the UN General Assembly, the photograph was alongside the Prime Ministers of Japan, Australia, and the President of the United States. It wasn't standing next to China. It wasn't standing next to Putin, right? So that's what the Quad is about. And so we all have long memories, right?
No, but you make an interesting point.
Right? We can talk about the 7th Fleet streaming into the Bay of Bengal 50 years later. All I'm asking, Rajdeep, is not to doubt whether India has the right to do it. Of course, India has the right to do it. America also has its own interests. And so from a realpolitik perspective, the question that America is going to be putting to India and that is being asked in Washington is, when the chips are down, what can we actually rely on this partner to do? And if the answer to that is, well, not much, that is not necessarily good for India. There still remains a question of whether or not India will get a waiver for CATSA. In December, there was a set of bipartisan congressional op-eds written about, of course, India has to get a waiver. This is an important strategic partner. India will likely still get a waiver. I would bet that right now. But the congressional hearings that have to happen before India can get a waiver against sanctions for buying that S-400 system are going to be of a very different flavor and complexion now than they were 3 months ago. There'll be a lot of very difficult questions asked. The United States still does not have an ambassador to India 14 months after Ambassador Jester left. There is no prospect of India having a U.S. ambassador in place probably for the rest of 2022, and then who knows if the Republicans take the Senate in the midterm elections, it might be a while. So the idea that this very important relationship that's important to both sides is not jeopardized, or at least undermined a bit, by the position, principled, justified, legitimate, all of that might be, position that India is chosen to take ways over Russia, that is naive. That is hoping for something that is not true.
Casey, you've closely followed the Quad in particular. Here is Professor Nuruddin saying you can't have it both ways. You can't say we want to be part of your strategic partnership to, in a way, encircle China, be part of Australia, Japan, United States, India in the Indo-Pacific. But then you have a war in the heart of Europe and you say, look, now we are going to be neutral and independent and we are not going to take any sides in this war. Can you have it both ways? Does India want to have its cake and eat it too? And is that really possible now in a multipolar world with China playing a particularly, the China is the elephant in the room for us. If we were to go along with the Americans, where does that leave the Chinese-Russian relationship, for example?
No, that's the point I made earlier when I said you can't be a democratic country and with the democracies in the Indo-Pacific and behave differently to the West. And coming to energy resources, I think it's wrong to keep saying the Europeans keep buying their oil and gas. Look, Germany has given up Nord Stream 2. What the Americans are saying is immediately everyone can't stop buying because then there'll be chaos in Europe. They are saying, we'll sit down with you and make a plan for alternative resources. So there is no ban on immediate buying, because if they stop buying, what do they do otherwise? But the bigger long-term project, Shell has walked out of Russia. A lot of investment of the European oil companies, they've just abandoned it and left Russia. So you can't say that, no, we can't do it. So what we have to sit down, and I think that's what the 2+2 is. The Americans will say, hey, sit down and let's have a plan on how to wean you away from this. We can't have this as a permanent thing, both where energy is concerned and arms are concerned. So let's see what they put on the table. And simply putting a little more pressure on the Russians is not going to make them more China-friendly or less China-friendly. They are smart enough, they know where they stand. And tomorrow, you don't know. If Putin goes, then, you know, if all this creates chaos, we made a mistake when Soviet Union was there. We kept, Gorbachev came to India when I was in Rashtrapati Bhavan. Rajiv Gandhi wined and dined him, and they, you know, they raised glasses to each other. We denounced the Reykjavik summit because the American that had not succeeded on arms limitation. Rajiv Gandhi went to UN the next year and gave a plan on nuclear disarming. We were disarming the world. And 5 years later, there was no Soviet Union left. So, you know, these are calculations you have to make. Where is the future going? Who are your future threats? You can't keep repeating old, forgotten slogans and hide behind them. You have to decide.
So before we take a break, future, Manoj Joshi, lies with India coming closer and closer into the US sphere of influence? The future doesn't lie with sort of recalling what Russia did in 1971 and how they helped us. That's nostalgia. Relationships are not built purely on nostalgia. The future lies with us moving closer and closer towards the United States, recognizing that China remains our principal threat on our borders. Would that be fair?
I think it would. And India has this very peculiar geopolitical profile that from the our friends and adversaries have remained the same between 1950 and 2020. Whereas if you look at the others, obviously the Americans were enemies of the Chinese. Then in 1972, they suddenly became quasi-allies. See, then they were friends of the Chinese. And in 2017, they have become adversaries again. The Russians and the Chinese were great friends till 1950s. Then suddenly they became enemies. And then now they have become friends again. So you see these large nations, they have been shifting their positions quite dramatically. But India, somehow or the other, seems to have remained anchored. And I agree that it seems that we are anchored in the past. And I agree with Casey saying that we got to now, whatever be the past, we got to look at the future. Our problem is we are scared of that future because, you know, Raj Chengappa pointed out that we are dependent on Russian systems maybe for about 35% or 40%. The actual truth is much worse. Even today, 80 to 85% of our platforms are of Russian origin, and we are dependent on them. So there's a vast dependence which has been understated, which has not been put out before the public of this country. So it will going to take decades before you're able to make a shift there.
Okay, let's, you know, in a way, this has been fascinating. The fact is that the two leaders were supposed to speak at 8:30. That got pushed forward. And as a result, we've been able to have a very educative, nuanced discussion on the challenges that India faces. It's not an easy path in a multipolar world, given our strong relationship with Russia and our emerging relationship with the United States to navigate that fine line. Let's take a break at this point. We expect the two leaders to be speaking live in about 10 minutes from now. I appreciate my guests joining us. You're watching the news track here on India Today. Back in a moment with the news today and the 9 headlines at 9.